Imagine this: a country with no oil, no gold, no farmland, and no water of its own. A place so small you can drive across it in less than an hour. Surrounded by giants like Malaysia and Indonesia. By logic, such a country should struggle. It should be weak, dependent, and always at risk of collapse when the world faces crises. But Singapore, not only does it survive, it thrives. While many nations drown in debt during global crises, Singapore stands tall. It is one of the few countries on Earth that never goes bankrupt. Why? Let's dive in. Chapter 1: The Paradox of a Tiny Giant. Singapore is a country that defies logic. On the world map, it looks like just a dot, smaller than many cities in other nations. With a land area of about 734 square kilometers, it cannot grow enough food to feed its people, and it has no oil, gas, or precious metals hidden under its soil. In fact, even its drinking water has to be imported. By common sense, such a nation should be fragile and dependent on others for survival. Yet, Singapore is one of the richest countries on Earth. Its GDP per capita consistently ranks among the highest in the world, putting it in the same league as oil-rich Gulf states and advanced economies like Switzerland or the United States. This is the paradox. How can a country with no natural advantages outperform nations blessed with abundant land, resources, and populations 100 times larger? The answer lies in design, not destiny. Singapore's leaders, starting from independence in 1965, knew they could not afford mistakes. Surrounded by larger and sometimes hostile neighbors, the island had no safety net. Every decision had to secure long-term survival. Instead of relying on what they didn't have, they doubled down on what they could build: human capital, strong institutions, and a reputation for trustworthiness. Singapore turned its geography into an advantage by building one of the busiest ports and airports in the world. It transformed into a hub for global finance, trade, and technology. By keeping corruption low and governance efficient, it attracted billions in foreign investment. This focus on resilience explains why Singapore has never gone bankrupt, even in times of global crisis. It was never luck, it was deliberate strategy, born from the determination to never be at the mercy of others. Chapter 2: The Fear of Collapse That Shaped Singapore. Singapore's strength today was born out of deep fear. In 1965, when Malaysia unexpectedly expelled the island, Singapore found itself alone. Its founding Prime Minister, Lee Kuan Yew, broke down in tears on national television. His emotion wasn't weakness, it was the raw recognition of reality. The young nation had no army to defend itself, no farmland to feed its people, and almost no international allies to rely on. To many observers, Singapore looked like a doomed experiment. Even its closest neighbors doubted its survival. Some predicted the new republic would collapse within months and be forced to crawl back to Malaysia or fall under foreign influence. Inside the country, unemployment was high, housing was poor, and ethnic tensions threatened to boil over. Survival was far from guaranteed. But instead of breaking Singapore, this fear became its greatest motivator. The country's leaders and people embraced the idea that if they were to survive, they could never be complacent. Every institution, every law, and every economic decision had to be built with one principle in mind: never again depend on someone else for survival. This mindset created a culture of discipline that still defines Singapore. Unlike many nations that drift through crises with short-term fixes, Singapore treats survival almost like a religion. It built one of the world's strongest defense forces despite its size, invested in housing to unite its people, and created strict financial systems to avoid debt traps. Fear of collapse turned into a relentless drive for security. It was this clarity, born from crisis, that set Singapore on a path to become a nation that not only survives but thrives, even when stronger countries stumble. Chapter 3: No Free Money. The Discipline of Saving. One of Singapore's greatest strengths lies in something very simple, but extremely rare in today's world: discipline with money. While many countries solve financial problems by borrowing endlessly, printing more cash, or taking loans from international institutions, Singapore refuses to play that dangerous game. From its earliest years of independence, the government adopted a rule so strict it shocks outsiders: it cannot spend more than it earns. Every budget must balance. Every cent is accounted for. There is no culture of reckless borrowing or passing today's debts onto tomorrow's generation. This is why Singapore is one of the few countries on Earth with almost no public debt. This strict financial discipline comes from a lesson Singapore never forgot. Fragile nations that borrow heavily often collapse under pressure. Instead of spending to impress or win short-term popularity, Singapore's leaders chose stability. Surpluses are not wasted. They are saved and invested. Think of it this way. In many families, when an emergency comes, credit cards are maxed out. The bills pile up, stress grows. But Singapore is like the rare household with a large emergency fund and extra savings invested wisely. When global crises strike, whether it was the Asian financial crisis of 1997, the 2008 global meltdown, or the COVID-19 pandemic, Singapore could protect its people using money it had already saved. This discipline doesn't just prevent bankruptcy, it builds trust. Investors, rating agencies, and ordinary citizens know that Singapore manages its finances with almost surgical precision. And in the global economy, trust is worth more than gold. In short, while other countries gamble with debt, Singapore proves that living within your means is not weakness, it is power. Chapter 4. The Rainy Day Fund, Singapore's national treasure. If Singapore's financial discipline is the shield that protects it, then its sovereign wealth funds are the sword that allows it to thrive in uncertain times. Unlike most countries that run on borrowed money, Singapore built something extraordinary, one of the largest rainy day funds in the entire world. In fact, Singapore doesn't just have one fund, it has two giants. The Government of Singapore Investment Corporation, GIC, quietly manages the nation's long-term reserves, investing in everything from real estate to global infrastructure. Then there is Temasek Holdings, which acts more like a global investor, owning stakes in airlines, telecom companies, banks, and even cutting-edge technology firms. Together, these funds manage over $1 trillion USD in assets, an amount so large it rivals the total economy of many advanced nations. This pool of wealth is not kept idle in banks. It is invested across the globe to keep growing year after year. The returns flow back into Singapore's reserves, ensuring that when the storms come, the country is ready, and the storms always come. During the 1997 Asian financial crisis, when neighboring economies crumbled, Singapore tapped its reserves to stay afloat. In the 2008 global financial crash, it again used its vaults to stabilize banks and protect jobs. Most recently, during the COVID-19 pandemic, when the world shut down, Singapore spent billions from its reserves to fund healthcare, support businesses, and keep citizens employed. Notice the pattern. While other countries begged the IMF or foreign creditors for emergency bailouts, Singapore simply reached into its own pocket. This is why the Rainy Day Fund is more than just money. It is a symbol of sovereignty and independence. For Singapore, having $1 trillion vault means one thing: it will never be at the mercy of others. Chapter 5. Smart investments, not blind spending. The real genius of Singapore's survival strategy lies not just in saving money, but in how it uses those savings. Unlike many countries that waste financial windfalls on short-term spending or political favors, Singapore treats every dollar as an investment seed that must grow. This mindset explains why the nation's sovereign wealth funds, Temasek Holdings and GIC, have built global portfolios worth over $1 trillion. Temasek owns stakes in some of the world's most recognized companies, from Singapore Airlines to DBS Bank to international giants in technology, healthcare, and energy. GIC, meanwhile, invests quietly but strategically across continents, in European airports, American tech firms, Australian properties, and Asian infrastructure. The profits from these investments don't vanish into luxury projects or reckless giveaways. Instead, they are reinvested, building layer upon layer of financial security. This is what makes Singapore's system so powerful. It doesn't rely on one-time luck, but on continuous growth. Think of the classic fable of the ant and the grasshopper. While many nations behave like the grasshopper, spending recklessly during good times and scrambling when crises hit, Singapore acts like the ant. It prepares for winter even during summer. By the time global recessions arrive, Singapore has a stockpile and income streams already working for its survival. This strategy also sends a clear message to the world. Wealth is not what you have, it's how you use it. A country can have oil, gas, and minerals, but if it wastes the profits, it remains poor. Singapore, with almost nothing under its soil, created wealth by turning discipline and intelligence into its greatest natural resources. In short, Singapore doesn't just save, it makes every dollar work like a soldier, defending the nation's future. Chapter 6. The Swiss of Asia: Trust and Stability. When people call Singapore the Switzerland of Asia, they aren't exaggerating. Just like Switzerland in Europe, Singapore has built a reputation for being stable, safe, and trustworthy in a world full of financial chaos. And in global finance, trust is everything. Singapore's banks are considered some of the most secure in the world. Strict regulations, careful oversight, and a culture of zero tolerance for corruption make them rock solid. Unlike many countries where political interference or weak systems put savings at risk, Singapore's banking system is designed to be reliable under any circumstance. Then there's the Singapore dollar, SGD. It is one of the strongest and most stable currencies in Asia. While other nations struggle with wild inflation or currency crashes, the SGD has maintained long-term stability. This strength is not by chance. It is the product of careful monetary policy and the government's commitment to never overspend or overborrow. For investors and citizens alike, the currency is a shield of confidence. But perhaps the most powerful factor is trust in governance. Singapore is famous for being one of the least corrupt countries on earth. Transparency, strict laws, and heavy penalties against corruption have created a system where public funds are protected, not stolen. This gives both citizens and foreign investors the confidence that their money is in safe hands. That's why, even during times of global crisis, capital flows into Singapore instead of fleeing it. In a world full of uncertainty, Singapore acts as a safe harbor, much like Switzerland. This trust makes the country almost bulletproof against bankruptcy. When the world panics, Singapore becomes a magnet for stability-seeking investors. In short, Singapore's greatest asset isn't land or oil, it's trust. Chapter 7. No oil, no problem. Most of the world's wealthy nations owe their fortunes to natural resources. Saudi Arabia has its oil wells, Russia has vast reserves of gas and minerals, South Africa is famous for gold and diamonds. These countries built their economies on what lies beneath the ground. But Singapore? It has nothing. No oil, no gas, no gold, not even enough land for farming. By normal logic, this should have doomed the country to permanent poverty. Yet, instead of being handicapped by this weakness, Singapore transformed it into a strength. Singapore's leaders understood early on that if they could not rely on the ground, they had to rely on their people and ideas. That vision turned Singapore into a hub of global activity. Its port became one of the busiest in the world, connecting Asia to Europe, Africa, and the Americas. Its airport, Changi, grew into a major gateway for global travelers and trade. These physical connections made Singapore the beating heart of regional commerce. But Singapore didn't stop there. It built world-class financial institutions and created laws that were transparent, fair, and attractive to international businesses. Global banks, shipping companies, and tech firms rushed to set up headquarters in Singapore, knowing that their investments would be safe and their profits secure. By becoming useful to everyone, traders, investors, and multinational corporations, Singapore made itself indispensable. Unlike oil or gas, which can run out or lose value, human capital and smart governance never expire. The more Singapore invested in education, infrastructure, and global connectivity, the stronger it became. That is why, even without natural resources, Singapore stands tall. Its secret is simple. Resources may run out, but knowledge and human ingenuity last forever. Chapter 8. Learning from other people's mistakes. Around the world, history is filled with examples of nations that went bankrupt. Greece nearly brought down the Eurozone during the debt crisis of the late 2000s. Argentina has defaulted on its debts so many times that international investors joke it is almost routine. Sri Lanka in 2022 collapsed under the weight of debt, fuel shortages, and economic mismanagement, forcing desperate citizens into the streets. The pattern behind these collapses is strikingly similar: overspending, corruption, and weak planning. Governments borrow heavily to fund short-term projects, make promises they cannot keep, and often allow corruption to bleed national wealth into private pockets. When global crises strike, these fragile systems crumble, leaving ordinary citizens to suffer while leaders scramble for bailouts from the International Monetary Fund, IMF. Singapore studied these cautionary tales carefully and decided it would never follow that path. From the beginning, it built a culture of accountability and strict financial discipline. Overspending is forbidden. Every budget must be balanced. Every dollar is tracked. Public servants are paid competitive salaries to remove the temptation of corruption, while tough laws ensure that anyone caught abusing power faces severe punishment. Beyond discipline, Singapore also plans far in advance. Instead of waiting for crises to strike, it prepares in advance, building reserves and safety nets to cushion any shock. This proactive approach means that when global downturns arrive, Singapore does not panic. It already has a strategy. This is why Singapore has never needed a bailout. While other nations line up at the IMF, Singapore stands on its own feet. Its leaders turn the mistakes of others into a manual for survival. And by doing the opposite of failing nations, Singapore ensured it would always remain stable, even in a world of uncertainty. Chapter 9: Crisis Management, Singapore's Superpower. If there is one thing that sets Singapore apart from most countries, it is its ability to handle crises with precision and speed. Where others stumble, Singapore acts. Where others hesitate, Singapore moves. This is not luck, it is the result of decades of preparation. When COVID-19 swept across the world in 2020, many governments froze. Lockdowns crippled economies, businesses collapsed, and millions lost their jobs. To make matters worse, most countries were already deep in debt. They had to borrow even more, printing money and taking loans just to keep their economies alive. The result was exploding debt and rising inflation. Singapore's response was different. Instead of begging for loans, it simply opened its national reserves. Billions of dollars were immediately released to support healthcare systems, fund vaccines, protect jobs, and keep businesses afloat. This money was not borrowed, it was saved during good years precisely for a crisis like this. Because it had the financial firepower ready, Singapore acted faster than almost any other nation. Small businesses were given lifelines, workers were retrained and supported, and hospitals were fully equipped. The government could focus on solutions instead of scrambling for funds. And this was not the first time. In the 1997 Asian financial crisis, Singapore defended its currency and economy using its reserves. During the 2008 global financial meltdown, it injected billions to stabilize banks and restore confidence. Each time, its preparedness meant it could strike quickly, preventing disaster. This is the core of Singapore's survival strategy. In crises, speed is survival. By saving early and planning ahead, Singapore ensures it is never caught unprepared. That is why, while many nations take years to recover from economic shocks, Singapore often bounces back stronger. Chapter 10: The Future. Can Singapore keep winning? The question many outsiders ask is simple. Will Singapore's miracle eventually run out? Can this tiny nation with no resources and constant global pressure really stay unshakable forever? The answer, looking at history and present trends, is very unlikely that Singapore will ever go bankrupt. Its reserves continue to grow, its investments stretch across the globe, and its government maintains strict financial discipline. Unlike many countries that live from crisis to crisis, Singapore plans decades ahead, ensuring every challenge has a prepared solution. But that doesn't mean the future is without obstacles. Singapore faces an aging population, which could put pressure on its healthcare system and reduce its workforce. It faces competition from rising powers like China and India, which are racing to dominate global trade and finance, and it faces climate change, a real danger for a low-lying island nation vulnerable to rising sea levels. Yet Singapore has faced existential threats before and survived. In 1965, few believed it would last a year. Instead, it rose to become one of the world's most advanced economies. That same spirit of resilience continues today. The true secret of Singapore is not just money in the bank, it's a mindset. A culture of discipline, planning, and fearlessness. Singaporeans are taught to live within their means, to value education, and to think long-term. This mindset, combined with leadership that refuses to gamble with the nation's future, is the ultimate safeguard. As long as Singapore holds on to this culture, it will not only survive, but continue to thrive. For Singapore, bankruptcy is not even on the horizon. Instead, the future holds one certainty: this tiny island will keep punching far above its weight. Conclusion: the lesson for the world. Singapore's journey is one of the greatest survival stories of the modern age. It shows us that a nation doesn't need to be vast in size, blessed with oil, or lucky with geography to succeed. What it truly needs is discipline, trust, and long-term vision. From the very beginning, Singapore refused to follow the easy road. It chose financial discipline over reckless borrowing, honesty over corruption, and planning over complacency. Where other countries gamble with debt, Singapore stays cautious. Where others splurge in good times, Singapore quietly saves. Where others collapse under pressure, Singapore stands firm and resilient. This is why Singapore has never gone bankrupt, even in the darkest global crises. Whether it was the Asian financial crisis, the 2008 meltdown, or the COVID-19 pandemic, Singapore had the reserves, the trust, and the mindset to act swiftly and decisively. It did not wait for handouts. It did not beg for bailouts. It stood on its own feet. The lesson here goes beyond economics. It's a philosophy of survival. In a world where uncertainty is the only certainty, the strongest currency isn't gold, oil, or even technology. It is discipline. Discipline to save when others spend. Discipline to plan when others delay. Discipline to stay united when others are divided. For individuals, for families, and for nations alike, Singapore's example shines as a reminder. True strength is not measured by what you have today, but by how prepared you are for tomorrow. And perhaps that is the greatest legacy of this tiny island. Against all odds, Singapore proves to the world that even the smallest nations can achieve the biggest victories. Not by chance, but by choice.